You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. This is Doug Thorpe, and you're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Today, my guest is a fellow coach and executive advisor who has done a lot of great work. She hails out of New York, and she is joining us today. Her name is Ashley Rudolph. Ashley, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me, Doug. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Likewise, I am looking forward to this. Ashley's got a neat framework that she'll share with us. But as is a little bit of a tradition here, Ashley, tell us a little bit about your journey to get to where you are today.
Yeah. Oh, what a great question to start with. So, like you said, I'm an executive coach, and I also run my own coaching company, which is why we're talking. We're both in the same space. And really, the reason why people come to me is because they're high achievers, either they're a leader or an executive, and they're feeling very bogged down in execution when they need to be more strategic. And that's exactly what my specialty is. So before getting into executive coaching, I spent about 15 years in industry, 10 of those years being in the tech industry, which is very fast paced and things are changing left and right all the time. And in the tech industry, I actually worked my way up from an individual contributor to a vice president in 5 years, my first 5 years in the industry. And in all of that, there were a lot of lessons learned. There were things that went great, which led to promotions, and things that I absolutely struggled with. And I kind of packaged all of those learnings up, and that's very much informed my coaching. So now I spend a lot of time with people who I'd summarize are either executives themselves or next generation executives, really helping them build high performance teams and organizations.
Yeah. Well, great story and somewhat of a common thread among many coaches. And I'm going to take that statement to plug a little bit of a self-aggrandizing thing for both of us.
Yeah.
I think when people think about hiring a coach, there's a cautionary tale. I would argue you need to be careful who you're going to reach out to, because it's undeniable a lot of people have hung out a shingle for coaching because they either got let go by the company they were with or they're they just haven't figured out what they really want to be when they grow up. And there are so many programs where you can get a certificate and call yourself some kind of coach. Of course, the gold standard internationally is the International Coaching Federation. And that's a pretty heavy gauntlet to get through for those that have tried. And I would encourage people to think about that. But I think more importantly, and to my main point is, I think if you're shopping for a coach, you ought to ask, well, what have you really done? Do you understand leading teams and inspiring people? Because if you haven't really done any of that, if everything you've got is from a classroom or a professor somewhere, probably not the best answer.
No, not at all. And I definitely have seen a lot of talk online about coaching and, who are reputable coaches and who aren't. And I think a lot of what makes us, you and I, special or maybe stand out in the industry is that you are able to speak to the things that you've experienced as a leader. There are really high highs and there are really low lows. And for me specifically, like I've gone through layoffs. So if someone were to come to me and ask about that experience, I can help them get through it. But I do think exactly what you're saying is right. It's working with someone who has navigated the challenges that you have or that has achieved a level of success, and in them achieving a level of success, hopefully they are able to, not just center their coaching around themselves and their experiences, but help you figure out what success looks like for you.
Yeah. You said something in your story background there that I think is really significant. You talked about the people that are kind of stuck in the execution and they're not really able to think strategically. I think that's a very important distinction in the sort of career path of someone who says, I want to be an executive leader in my industry.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's talk a little more about that pivot, that shift from execution, which usually comes from a background of being an individual contributor. You get promoted because you got recognized for great work, great service, great execution, and now you're on that hamster wheel of let's execute more.
Yeah. You just nailed it, right? So people get stuck in that because when they were an individual contributor, or maybe even, let's say, like the next level of manager, or one of those levels, they got there because of their ability to execute, to get the work done, to maybe be proactive and solve problems for their manager or for their organization. And in those cases, sometimes doing more and getting a lot of work done is what makes you stand out. But then there's a shift when you actually realize that, wow, what got me here won't get me to the next level, or won't make me successful in this level, where people start to feel that tension of like, oh my gosh, I'm doing all the work. Maybe I'm doing two people's jobs and I'm like checking all these boxes, doing all these things. I have so much work on my plate. I'm doing a fantastic job. And they get that feedback from their manager, which is, I need you to be more strategic. And then they're like, oh my gosh, what does that even mean? I thought that I was supposed to be doing lots of work, maybe stretching myself thin. Maybe I'm on the brink of a burnout, when really the ask is, are you focusing on the right things? Are you making the right decisions? Are you leading a team and focusing them on the right things, right? Like, you can't have a team that's focused on hundreds of different tasks because you just want to do all the things, right? So, yeah.
And I think that evolution of sort of mindset, that ability to become a strategic thinker is not natural.
No.
For most. I mean, there are a few people that are pretty good at it. They're kind of natural visionaries in their personalities, but for most people, it's a struggle. And what I've often witnessed is people have risen up a couple of levels, and they're feeling the pressure from above that is essentially saying, I need you to be more strategic. But those up the organization haven't really explained what that is or what it means, needs to be. But they're putting the pressure down, and the person coming up is saying, I feel the pressure, boss. I don't know what to do about it. And they're not willing to say that.
Yeah. And then I think some people interpret it as like, I shouldn't be executing anymore. There is this, ideal dream world where I just get to think about strategy every day. And like, that's what my manager wants me to do. And it's like, nope, that's actually not what they want you to do. But it's exactly what I said before is, how do you know? And how do you know that you're working on the right things? Are you working on the right things? What is your plan? Have you thought about what you want your team to look like 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 12 months from now? And how is that vision shaping the actions that you're taking every single day? And that's work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And it is such an interesting paradigm that everybody, I think, experiences on the journey up the chain. But again, I stress the fact that it's really a function of, are the people above you able to kind of mentor you and explain a little more about how they define strategic thinking, and what is the real expectation and where is it? I've actually had clients, as we've worked together a little bit, we've identified this gap as the big thing they're wrestling with the most. And I'll say, well, go talk to your boss and see what they say. And I'll help them frame up an exact set of questions to ask the boss. And it's interesting how many times the boss's real answer is, I'm not sure that I know what it means.
Yeah, totally. Right. And I've encountered that too, where there are people who can't describe what being strategic is, but it's something like, oh, I'll know it when I see it, which doesn't help the person who needs to become more strategic get to that point, because you're not able to articulate exactly what it is that you want to see. And I think, yeah, that's such an interesting exercise that you have your clients do. It's just like, okay, well, have the conversation with your boss, start there. And it tells you a lot when they come back to you with that answer. Yeah.
Right. Well, let's talk about your framework. I alluded to it in the intro. You've got a three-part, and maybe I've missed a part that you want to talk about, but tell us kind of your framework that you try to get people to work with and understand.
Yeah, totally. So one of the frameworks that I use a lot with my clients, it's the 3 C's of leadership. And this actually gets to some of the execution to strategy shift, at least from a communications perspective. So there's 3 C's, and I've noticed that high achievers or leaders who are really good at what they do have mastered all 3 of them. So the first one is content, and that's where most high achievers excel. They know their subject matter expertise. It is probably why they've been promoted throughout the years. They are true experts in their fields. They know their work. They know their line of work. That's the content. Context is the second C. And context is, can I adjust my messaging to the right audiences? And I see a lot of high achievers struggle with this, and that because they're a subject matter expert, they're not able to have conversations at both the executive level and maybe the individual contributor level, right? Because they're an expert, maybe their thinking is too in the weeds. And when it comes to explaining to an executive what they're working on and why they're working on it and how that relates to the big picture, it falls apart because they're trying to talk to the executives in the weeds, which is probably why they get the you need to be more strategic feedback. Mm-hmm. So context is being able to shift and make sure that you're talking to the right audiences in the right way. And then the third one is confidence. And I like to include this in there because some of my clients come into coaching assuming that confidence is an end state. But what I like to work with them on is, you're an individual, and honestly, at some point in your professional career, you should understand what you need to show up as the most confident version of yourself so that you can show up in those ways. So for some people, that's preparing before meetings, and maybe they are not someone who can ever contribute off the cuff, right? Like a lot of people freeze when they're asked to contribute in the moment and give an idea, but when they've had time to think about it, yeah, they have great ideas. So if you're someone like that, preparation is probably going to lead to you showing up as a confident version of yourself. Just walking in blind, you will probably show up as someone who actually isn't very confident. So for that one, the main takeaway for me and for my clients is, how are you creating the right conditions for yourself so that you can show up as a confident person in the spaces where you need to be? So it's content, context, confidence, and maybe it should be the 3 cons. I don't know, but it's the 3 C's. Yeah.
Subtle joke in there, but
yeah.
No, I like where you're going, and I have a similar thesis that I share with clients often. That often the first question I challenge a leader with is, "What kind of leader do you want to be? Have you ever done the work to build your own framework?" To use that word. Build your own definition of the leader you really want to be, and you can bring in principles, beliefs, values. All those things are pertinent, but you have to make them action words that describe what you're going to do. And again, in my observation, working with hundreds of executives, I think the common thread is, for the person that's not confident in the moment, it's because they don't know where they're coming from. They've just sort of evolved into the role they've been given.
Yeah.
and it's very shaky ground. It's very uncertain foundation, and
Yeah.
just like a good strong building, and you got
Yeah.
to have a solid, strong foundation
Yeah.
to be the root and the base. And I think leaders need to do the same thing.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think that's such a useful exercise. And a lot of people don't do it. And what I've seen is that maybe they read books or they've taken a leadership class and they think that there's a certain, definition of leadership that they have to norm on. And asking the question of what kind of leader do you want to be often kind of rewires their thinking, I think. And you do have the freedom to say, oh, the type of leader that I want to be is maybe authentic, or someone that is, someone who my team can trust their word. Obviously, there's a word there, but my brain is not able to pinpoint what I
Yeah,
want to say in an eloquent
trustworthy,
way there.
trustworthy.
Trustworthy.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. So authentic, trustworthy, maybe high accountability is, sorry, maybe high accountability is the type of leader that you want to be, right? You want to have a team that has a high bar and you can coach them to meet that high bar, right? So yeah, I think it is really important to have your leaders go through that thinking of defining who they want to be. Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, and the benefit that I've found in getting people to do that work, then it also sets them up for the notion of being able to respond rather than react
Yeah.
when what happens around you.
Yeah.
No plan is perfect.
Yeah.
When reality sets in, things change, things shift. We're living in a fast, volatile, uncertain world of business
Yeah.
for a lot of reasons, and for leaders to respond well rather than just simply react.
Yeah.
You've got to have that, again, that foundation, that basis of where you're coming from, and that can be the
Yeah.
filter for looking at this new thing that just got thrown at you,
Yeah.
and say, yeah, that fits, or no, it doesn't fit. So here's my response.
Yeah. 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 It's grounding. Yeah. That's
Yeah,
great.
very much so.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about. I'm curious, as you maybe meet a new client, what are some of the usual experiences in the early stages of onboarding a client? What are the
Mm.
kinds of discussions you have with them?
Yeah. So I am and I think a lot of good coaches are as well. So I won't say that this is completely unique, but I'm a goal-oriented person. So I take a lot of time to understand what their goals are coming into coaching, even if they do shift over time as we start to uncover what is actually important to them in the work. But I do want to understand what their goals and expectations are at the start. I also do I like personality assessments, but I find more value in understanding how the client talks to me about their results, right? So it's not like understanding what someone's Myers-Briggs results are. And then I'm like, saying, oh, this is the type of person that you are. That's not it. I like to hear exactly what resonated for them, where they might be encountering issues in their day-to-day because of what the results are for them in the personality assessment. So we spend a little bit of time there, not a ton, but it's more about developing self-awareness, I think. And then once we get started into coaching, the thing that I really enjoy about the process is being able to mirror back what I am seeing, what I am hearing from my clients in ways that maybe they hadn't seen it in themselves or thought about things in that way. And the thing that I really love about that entire process is that's when the shifts start to happen, which you probably see as well. Like sometimes it just takes a little bit of self-awareness or the right questions to get people thinking differently about how they show up in their day to day. And the result at the end can be anything from someone feeling, you know, much more sure-footed in their leadership and how they show up for their team. And maybe they are more confident and strategic and being able to think about their long-term plan. Or maybe it's someone who discovered throughout the process that maybe they are a director or a senior director, but that they are actually ready for the vice president level and going off and finding a new job and taking that next step for themselves because that opportunity may not have been available to them at their current job. Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's an executive who had a team in place that wasn't really clicking, and we worked together on shifting the culture in the organization. And now it's like they completely have a new team. So I think the best way to describe it is we spend a lot of time in the beginning with the client looking inward first, and then looking inward allows them to like see a lot of the change that they want to see outward.
You know, it is interesting. You also mentioned, you know, what got you here won't get you there.
Yeah.
There is a natural phenomenon that as people get invited to step up, either consciously or subconsciously, sometimes what they do when they realize what they've done so far is not going to necessarily be sufficient for the new role, they start looking externally and they start thinking about predecessor leaders that were, quote, successful at that level, and they start modeling and emulating behaviors. And it can be vocabulary, it can be attitude, it can be the way they treat people, everything. And they're really stepping out of their own skin to try to take on that other persona of the so-called successful leader that preceded them. And I've seen it's a fortunately good shift. I've seen people being less willing to take on that modeling and more willing to, why don't we try it my way? You know, why don't we do this higher job now under my own ideas? I tell a story. I was working with a team of executives at one of the large oil companies. Mm-hmm. And the leader of this team, I mean, basically everybody on the team had all been promoted up one level at about the same time. And they were a new leadership team in one of the verticals of the company. And I had the privilege of sitting in with one of their early organizational type meetings as this leadership team. And the senior leader said to the group, he said, "Hey, folks, remember in our early days of our own career, we used to point up the organization and go, those guys, you know, man, if they knew what we were doing, you know," and he said, "Guess what? We are now them." And his message was, I'm inviting you to bring with you all those things you said you didn't like or didn't appreciate about those guys. We are now them. So what are we going to do different?
What are we going to do?
And I thought it was brilliant. And I wished that had been a coaching point to him, but he had already figured that out on his own and basically laid that out as the charter for this team. And it was a brilliant starting point. And then, but I think it speaks to the idea that just because there were decades of leaders before you that operated a certain way, doesn't mean you have to operate exactly that way. No. Particularly if you knew that the vibe on the at your level was negative, you know. If everybody said, "Why does that guy do that to us? Why does he treat us that way? Why, you know, blah, blah, blah." So I think it's important to be aware and be willing to make that shift and try it out and say, well, what if I did do it differently? What would that look like?
What would that look like for you? And I think a lot of times it ends up feeling very positive. And you know, there's just a certain level of ownership with someone being able to say, oh yeah, this is the type of leader that I want to be. And then you try it and it ends up working well for you, right? That's a decision that you made in your leadership. You're capable of making those decisions. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but you also have the freedom to say, well, that didn't work. So let me try something else, Yeah.
I want to ask you something, Ashley, while I've got you, given your domain and the work you do.
Yeah.
I read an article recently on LinkedIn. Somebody posted that there was a survey done somewhere that some of the younger generations in the workplace
Yeah.
are not buying into our traditional buzzwords, our business speak.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
they're put off by terms like high performing teams or high
Yeah.
performing individual.
Yeah.
And boy, I can honestly say from where I sit, that's been a legacy kind of word for a long time.
Yeah.
We've talked about high potentials, which infers high performance.
Yes.
I mean, that's just been woven into the fabric of most modern business. So,
Yeah.
what do we need to think about with with the younger generations, just really
Yeah.
pushing back on that?
Yeah. And I think this all comes down to the fact that we have a generation, Gen Z and then Gen Alpha, that are coming up right after them, whose motivations are just completely different than the rest of ours. And what we're seeing is that this generation is more motivated by mission-driven work or more motivated by flexibility and things like that. And there is a paradox there. There may be a paradox in that some of the things that they're craving actually don't fit neatly into the current construct of what our work environments are. And that's an adjustment. So, in a lot of my client work, just the tension across generations is coming up. And the thing that I've been working with a lot of my leaders on is understanding one, what the person's motivations are, which doesn't necessarily mean that you have to pander to their motivations, but understanding the motivation is a data point, and maybe there's different framing that you can use, or maybe there's more context that they need to understand the ask of them. The second piece is once you understand their motivations, the other thing is being very clear about what you can realistically provide, right? So I've had clients who work with team members who want their work day to look very different than what the work day actually was at the company. And it's like, okay, great. I understand that that's what you want and that's what you think a workplace is, but I can't realistically provide you with that. And now we need to have a conversation about whether you're willing to norm to these norms at this workplace or whether this isn't a fit for you, right? Or somewhere in between. And then the third question that I have people ask is like, okay, well, now that I understand the client's motivation, the employee's motivations and and whether or not I can realistically meet their motivations. Okay, well, am I willing to have the hard conversations with them about what we do next? And do they have any role to play in some of the decision making here, whether it's feedback, whether it's, what may have you, any number of things. And once we walk through that exercise, I think it makes a lot of the leaders feel like, oh, okay, I have agency here. And maybe there is, some sense of agency that I can be creating on these team members, but it just is about walking through those. But I think at the core of it is that this generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they just have wildly different motivations than some of us.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I think there's also some indications, particularly from Gen Z and younger, that they've grown up with a reality that winning a participation trophy was a lie.
Totally.
And they're carrying this immense guilt. I've interviewed a number of them, and that subject, I haven't brought it up. They brought it up.
Yeah.
That receiving that participation trophy was a lie. Our team stunk. We were a lousy team. We don't need a trophy for that. We knew we were bad, and but it has manifested as a kind of a guilt, and now I'm not even sure how that's being dealt with or extrapolated into the work they're trying to do in the quote adult world.
Yeah.
But it's a real thing that I've heard a lot of people talking about.
Yeah, it
And
is a real thing for
it does
sure.
make me pause as a leader and say, all right, what should a leader's response to that be? You
Yes.
know, and I
Yes.
think what I recommend to people is you need to have an honest
Yes.
as you can be conversation about
Yes.
expectations and obligations.
Yes. Exactly.
Here's what we
Exactly.
got. Here's what we can accommodate.
Yep.
Here's where it is, and
Yep.
here's how you stack up to the
Yeah.
expectation.
Yeah.
And we'll have that tough talk. We'll have that
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah, exactly. And that's probably the kindest thing that you can do as a leader is just being honest with your teams about what the reality is. And I do think that the participation trophy dynamic is making its way into organizations as like expectations of, okay, well, I did the bare minimum of my job, and that means that I get a raise. Well, if you're in a performance based organization, doing the bare minimum actually isn't going to get you a raise. And there's a lot of tough conversations happening there where it's like, oh my
Right,
gosh, I didn't realize. And that's just one example. But
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
I, well, Ashley, this has been great. Thank you for sitting in, spending some time with us. Tell people the best way to get a hold of you if they're interested in knowing more about your work.
Yeah, great. So they can find me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is Ashley Rudolph, and it's Rudolph with the PH, like the reindeer. And they can find me on my website, which is www.workwithashleyr.com. And my newsletter is newsletter.workwithashleyr.com.
Great.
All
Well,
right.
as always, folks, we'll have those links in the show notes so you can hop down, mash on those, and reach out to Ashley if you are looking for more. But one last time, Ashley, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Doug. This was a great conversation.
I agree. I agree. Well, folks, I do like to remind you that we've got a video version of this show over on YouTube, a channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check out the archives. We are rapidly coming up on show number 400, so we'll have that out
Wow.
soon. And look forward to getting your input and intake there. If you'd like to get a hold of me, you can simply go to my site, Doug Thorpe. That's THORPE.com. And there's plenty of buttons there to ask for a free discovery call or get some of my other giveaway resources that we've got there. But for now, I think we've got everything done. So we're going to call it a wrap. Go out there, make it a great day.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.